In May, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Japanese counterparts agreed in principle to a future UK-Japan Reciprocal Access Agreement, otherwise known as an RAA, which would allow for greater security cooperation between the two countries. That deal, though, was put on the back burner during the chaos-ridden Truss government, but reports suggest that Sunak is going to sign it this month, which would be the first real indication of what stance Sunak is going to take towards China. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the deal itself, what it tells us about Sunak's foreign policy, and some of its geopolitical implications. By the way, a majority of you haven't subscribed to TLDR UK. Shocking, right? So if you haven't made the leap yet, then hit subscribe, ring the bell, and never miss out on our British content. Anyway, let's start with the deal itself. Japan and the UK announced their intention to negotiate an RAA on September 28th of last year, less than 2 weeks after the announcement of AUKUS, a trilateral security pact between Australia, the UK, and United States, centered around improving defense capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region. At the time, Japan was already negotiating an RAA with Australia, which is exactly what the new Japan-UK RAA is based on. And in their press statement, the Japanese Foreign Ministry stated that the new Japan-UK RAA would be aimed at, quote, realizing a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, the phrase free and open Indo-Pacific was actually first coined by Japan in 2016, and then was taken up by the Trump administration in 2019 as a name for their strategy in the region. In this context, then, it looks like the Japan-UK RAA was part of a wider anti-China alliance, originally spearheaded by the US and Japan, and then expanded to include Australia and the UK. And this is something that the Johnson government was pretty keen on. Their much-anticipated integrated review of defense and foreign policy, which came out in July of 2021, noted the growing importance of the Indo-Pacific region, and stated that the UK would pursue deeper engagement in the region, including with Japan. Anyway, the first round of negotiations took place on October 7th of last year. But after 6 months, the outlines of the deal already began materializing. In fact, on May 5th, Kishida travelled to London to meet Johnson, and the two sides agreed to the RAA in principle. At the time, Johnson said that our security in Europe is indivisible from our collective security in the Indo-Pacific region, and warned that there is a, quote, direct read across from the actions of the autocratic, coercive powers in Europe to what may happen in East Asia, a thinly veiled reference to China. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, this deal was put on the back burner while UK politics was convulsed by the Truss premiership. But in the last few weeks, there have been multiple reports that Sunak will sign off on the deal in early December. In fact, on Friday, Sunak held his first call with Kishida, where he said that he will be continuing with the Indo-Pacific tilt that originated with Johnson, and agreed to accelerate the RAA. Then on Saturday, the Financial Times reported that the RAA should be agreed by December, citing two sources familiar with negotiations. The report also said that the Japan-UK RAA will basically mirror the Japan-Australia RAA, which was signed in January of this year. And notably, the main thing that deal was provide a legal framework to make it easier for the two countries to perform joint military exercises, which were previously often hindered by red tape. Anyway, the new Japan-UK RAA will probably do the same thing, but it won't quite be as important as the Japan-Australia one, because, well, the UK and Japan don't cooperate in as many military exercises, thanks to being quite a long way apart. Regardless of that, though, this is still very interesting, because Rishi Sunak's foreign policy is something of a mystery at the moment, making this deal incredibly useful in understanding what we can expect going forward. Now, Sunak's thoughts in this area are a mystery because the new Prime Minister doesn't really have any foreign policy experience, so until recently, no one really knew what sort of a policy posture his government would take. Now, during the campaign, he was briefly criticized by the Trust campaign for being too soft on China, who accused him of being keen to trade with China by associating him with David Cameron's so-called Golden Era policy. Now, in response to this, Sunak posted a conspicuously hawkish thread on Twitter, describing the CCP as the largest threat to Britain and the world's security. However, this was clearly more of a retort during a campaign and a tactic to win him favour with voters rather than actual policy. And Sunak has already said that he won't be following through with all of his campaign promises. However, this new agreement and the fact that he's appointed former leadership contender Tom Tugendhat to his cabinet as security minister suggests that he's basically going to continue with Johnson's foreign policy posture outlined in the integrated review and take a relatively hawkish stance on China. And the RAA with Japan plays into this, with it clearly directed at deterring and containing China in the Indo-Pacific. And with Tugendhat now behind it, that intention's even clearer, because Tugendhat was a China hawk before it was cool. Tugendhat actually formed the China Research Group in April 2020, which was sanctioned by the CCP last year. And just this month, Tugendhat confirmed that the government wanted to shut down the 30 or so Chinese Confucius Institutes in the UK. Now, Confucius Institutes are cultural centres indirectly supported by the Chinese government. They're supposed to be politically neutral and focus on educating anyone who's interested about Chinese culture and language. But various Western governments have become suspicious of them as relations with China have deteriorated, seeing them as a means for the CCP to advance their propaganda. Anyway, the point here is that the fact that the UK is shutting them down suggests that Sunak is pursuing a more hawkish stance on China than we might have expected or previously seen from other Conservative governments. So that's the RAA and what it tells us more broadly about Sunak's foreign policy. But before we go, a little more on the geopolitics of it all. Because, as we mentioned at the beginning, this is part of a wider strengthening and diversifying of the anti-China alliance in the Indo-Pacific, which is something the UK is apparently keen on getting involved in. Basically, though, until recently, the security arrangement in the Indo-Pacific revolved around the US. Sure, there were countries like Japan, Australia, and the Philippines who were all suspicious of China, but they didn't have bilateral security relations. Instead, they were sort of indirectly connected via the US. For example, until the 2010s, Japan and Australia didn't really have any security relationship at all, but they were both allies with the US. However, as wariness of China and concerns about the reliability of the US as a strong partner have grown, especially during the Trump years, these Indo-Pacific countries have created a new web of anti-China security agreements as a sort of hedge against America's unreliability. There's the Quad, AUKUS, the Japan-Australia RAA, and now the Japan-UK RAA. And there have even been reports that Japan and the Philippines are also negotiating an RAA, which would be a pretty significant development in the region. The point we're making here is that the Indo-Pacific security structure is moving away from a hub and spokes model with the US as a hub to more of a diffuse web of bi- and trilateral agreements. And this RAA is yet another example of it. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to subscribe to TLDR UK for more. And if you want to go crazy, then check out all of the other TLDR channels while you're at it. There's TLDR EU, US, and Global for country-specific content. There's TLDR Business, if you want to dip into that world. Then there's our daily news summaries over on the TLDR Daily channel, or even long-form chats on TLDR Podcasts. Now, that's a lot of content, admittedly. But hey, it's free, so you can hit subscribe a few times if you want it bad enough. Anyway, thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.